think, as most of us experience in life, sometimes what God asks of us is often daunting, a bit confusing sometimes, and many times not exactly what we had in mind or what we planned. And then out of nowhere, God is asking us to do something radically different, radically new. Well, who better to turn to than Mary?
Oftentimes in our life, we can struggle with sinful habits, and we try to kind of concentrate on not doing something. And that's not a terrible thing to do, but the most effective thing is usually to concentrate on trying to love God. And fixing our eyes on God, we can overcome sin. Our Lady teaches us that. In fact, she can help us do that. Her eyes are always on the Lord, and as we're trying to kind of rise up out of our own weakness and fallenness, we call upon Our Lady, and we say, Mary, help me. And we do that, she teaches us, look up, look at the Lord. I'm the handmaid of the Lord, my eyes are on the Lord. Join me, put your eyes on Him. And we discover exactly what power over sin is.
Mary perfectly conformed her life to Christ, but that does not mean she didn't know suffering. As we seek to live our vocation or calling from God, we will find the cross. Our Lord reminds us of that. And even our Lord, who of course was completely perfect, He's the God-man, knew suffering and sorrow, right? And interceded for us. The key is, as we imitate Mary in following Christ and drawing close to Him, that we always have hope.
The gospel narrative tells us that she stands at the foot of the cross. And I love how this speaks to her strength. And not only that she stands at the foot of the cross by the grace of God, but she can stand by us.
Here is the most righteous and pure and good of all sons. Every parent's weep over the early death of a child. Now, when that child has been a total, absolute wreck and caused great suffering all the time, even then they weep horribly for the death of this child. How much more so when this child is the most virtuous of all sons, has to die a horrific, tortured death in the eyes in front of his mother for a bunch of ungrateful people, many of whom will not even accept what he's doing for them. And so even though there are many privileges, privilege doesn't mean you're excused from the mission and the task of the suffering and taking up your cross and following Christ.
To be a wonderful disciple, we have to be faithful and we have to learn how to rejoice, but we also have to learn how to say yes in the ordinary things, but also in those difficult moments. I think that is where she's our greatest model. I can imagine her saying her fiat all throughout her life.
The thing is, Christ didn't come to just take away all that suffering. He came to be present with us during that suffering. And I think that's a huge comfort when we realize that in our darkest moments, the lower and lower we get, the worse things get, it's like the further and further we run into His open arms. He's there, He understands our pain, and He loves us through all the challenges that we go through. That's one thing that meditating on the Hail Marys, the decades of the Rosary, that's one thing that can really grow in your heart is this devotion to Mary that will help you unite your suffering with Christ's suffering.
What does she teach us about discipleship is that in all circumstances we can give thanks because death is not the last word. And so whatever it is that brings us real sorrow, or sometimes it's watching others that we love suffer. Mary has watched the one she loved suffer. She shows us to keep our eyes on the Lord in His death and ultimately in His resurrection.
The ability to receive from God is dependent on our emptiness in a way. If there's someone who has everything, who knows everything, their hands are too full to receive anything from God, Mary's openness, her humility, her emptiness in a way, makes her available to for God to be able to work in her. In his own cross, he's reenacting what she's already done. By emptying himself, he's able to bear his life to the world. She, by emptying herself, bears his life into the world.
Mary is constantly learning from Christ. She's constantly turning to Christ. And in that, we find our own challenge to constantly interact with Christ, to be challenged by him, to enter into what he reveals and to follow where he goes, and not necessarily on our own plans. Because sometimes God will change courses for us because they always point toward our salvation. They are always going to be in accord with the Father's will, and it's always going to draw us deeper into wisdom.
We too can make Christ incarnate, not in the way that Our Lady did, which is utterly unique, but in a real way, in a very real way. We too can bring Christ to flesh here in the world. So that's probably what we would want to do in response to the mystery of Our Lady, is first to rejoice, and second to imitate her by loving God, treasuring things divine, and carrying them out in our lives so that Christ comes into the world again through us, the members of his body.
You know, if we are able to reflect upon and give thanks to the great things that God has done for us, as we look around and see the many signs of his presence in our midst, how can you not be filled with joy? And that's what Mary did, right? You know, her spirit, her soul rejoices in the Lord because she was so attuned, so aware of God's greatness, of God's goodness, how God has acted in and through her life. And I think if we take time to remember that too, we will find joy. And she's the perfect example of that.
I, Emily, a faithless sinner, renew and ratify today in thy hands the vows of my baptism. I renounce forever Satan, his pomps and works, and I give myself entirely to Jesus Christ, the incarnate wisdom, to carry my cross after him all the days of my life, and to be more faithful to him than I have ever been before.